Okay, we're going to finish up chapter 10 and work on chapter 11 today. And it looks like where I've got my marker here, where we left off, was on page 368, where it talks about prenatal development. Prenatal would be what? You don't know. Well, what's it look like? That beautiful picture of that little prenatal child. What is prenatal? Can you tell by looking at the picture? It's before you come into the world. Before you start breathing and eating on your own. Prior to that, you're getting all of your nourishment, oxygen, from your mother. And did anyone tell you that anything that gets into your mother's bloodstream basically passes from the mother's blood into the baby's blood? That's how they get their nutrients and their oxygen. And that's how they get all of those things called teratogens. And probably the most important thing to know about this prenatal stuff is there's a whole bunch of things that you can do that can damage an unborn baby. And you can find this stuff on the internet. I just Googled pregnancy and teratogens, and it gives you a whole bunch of stuff there. So you can find all that information and just be aware of it. And you know what's probably sad for an expectant mother is that she won't know she's pregnant. Gotcha today. She won't know she's pregnant till after she's already had a little bit of time to do some damage to the baby. You go, well, that's awful. Well, it's not so awful if you embrace a Christian approach to life, and that is basically your body's a temple of the Holy Spirit. And ladies, when you get married and you and your husband talk about having a baby, it's time to start changing your lifestyle. Now, I will admit, my wife grew up in a home where they drank coffee all the time, because some lists will tell you avoid caffeine. And interesting enough, when she got pregnant, coffee didn't smell good to her, and she quit drinking it. And I'm thinking, that probably wasn't a bad thing. I mean, I don't think people who drink coffee when they're pregnant do damage to their children, but it doesn't hurt to know that God sometimes gives you an appetite for something you need, or even a distaste for something you like that might not be good for the baby, because whatever that caffeine does in your blood, it goes to the baby, and then the baby's so much smaller, it's exaggerated, the effect of it. So it could be we would have had more hyper children if my wife would have kept drinking coffee while she was pregnant. I don't know if that would have happened for sure, but I'm just saying from what I've studied about teratogens, there's a lot of things. I mean, haven't most of you heard that pregnant women should stay away from children who have, is it measles? You haven't heard. So don't go around people like that because it can harm the baby. Probably the worst things that happen are people who do drugs and turn their babies into crack babies before they're born, and people who drink large amounts of alcohol. And they show a picture, I think, somewhere in here, on page 369, of a child with fetal alcohol syndrome, because the alcohol in the blood of the mother gets into the baby, and adversely affects the child's growth and development. And of course, you say, well, wow, everybody needs to be careful about that. Well, if you're not sexually active, you don't have to be careful about that. I mean, when people say, I got pregnant and it was such a surprise, I'm thinking, how could it be a surprise? I mean, if you're married, then you think, hey, that could always happen. And if you're single, you wouldn't be doing the kind of things that could get you pregnant. But somehow our world has messed up things enough to where we're kind of messed up in that regard. Okay, so now let's talk about the newborn. What about newborns? Oh, page 370. Have you ever played with a newborn baby? Did you ever tickle that little baby's foot? And what did they do? Did you ever put your hand out, your finger out, your little finger out to that little baby's hand, and what did they do? They grasp it. It's just what they do. It's called reflexes on page 370. Talks about their reflexes, and then it talks about their temperament. Well, and already it gets a little testy in here. I was asking you before class, for the people online, I was asking the students in class if they'd ever taken any kind of a temperament test, and we'll talk about that in the next chapter. But here we talk about it a little bit on page 370. But who came up with these labels? Okay, at the bottom of page 370, there are 3 kinds of children: easy, difficult, and slow to warm up. Okay, do you know what kind of child you were? Has anyone ever told you? Were you an easy child, a difficult child, or slow to warm up? What?
Easy.
Easy? Easy?
During what ages?
This would be at the newborn stage. As a newborn baby, no one ever told you what you were like, huh? The rest of you don't know. Well, the next time you see your parents, say, hey Mom, was I an easy child, a difficult child, or slow to warm up? Now, what are you hoping your parents will say? You don't care? You'll take whatever they tell you? You kind of know what you were? Now, see these 2 ladies up here that know they were easy children? Is there any guarantee that when they get married someday and have children, that their children will be easy, or will their children possibly be difficult or slow to warm up? And if you were an easy child, and your mother talks about how much fun it was to have you as a baby, and you happen to bring into this world a difficult child, you might be asking your mother to take care of that child once in a while so you can have a break. And at the bottom of page 370, it describes what they mean. They're just easy to care for, good-natured, adaptable. Difficult, they're anything but good-natured. They're not adaptable, they're moody, and they're not easy to take care of. And slow to warm up, you've probably met those at church. Somebody has a new baby and you go, oh, you have a new baby. The easy child and the parent says, yes, look at the new baby. And the easy child kind of looks up at you and smiles and coos. What does a difficult child do? He turns around and, no, I don't want anything to do with those people. Keep them away from me. What does the slow to warm up child do? He just kind of curls up down in his mother's arms and looks the other way, and especially if you look strange. And what would make me look strange to somebody who just brought a new baby to church? Oh, the parents don't wear glasses, and the little baby sees my glasses, and that's foreign to the baby, and it's like, oh, it makes him nervous. I said, and they say, here, hold my baby, Dr. Bono. I said, no, I said, Give this child some time to get to know people. And plus my voice is raspy, so it doesn't sound like what they've been hearing at home. Because most parents talk to their little babies in what kind of modified baby talk a little bit? Soft and gentle. So if you don't know, if you can't figure out what you were, then based on your personality now, just next time you see your parents, say, so which was I? And I'm thinking easy and slow to warm up. I mean, those kind of words kind of have a positive, I mean, there's nothing negative about easy or slow to warm up, is there? But difficult? My goodness, why would they pick such a negative word to describe us? Why would my brother and sister be easy or slow to warm up and I was difficult? Why can't you find another word? Can any of you think another word besides difficult so I don't feel so bad about being that middle child? Say, well, the whole description is kind of negative. I see one word there that isn't so negative. That word strong. How about if we said there's an easy child, a slow to warm up child, and then a child with a very strong personality? Does that help? Like a strong cup of coffee? I mean, isn't that less emotional? Doesn't that have less of an emotive sound to it? But just understand that the people who write these books are saying, hey, we're just saying some of you are just difficult children. And you can call it what you want, but your parents will say and your caregivers will say you were just difficult. All right. So maybe I've been difficult all my life and just don't want to admit it. Page 373 talks about infancy and childhood. On page 374, there are some pictures of some infants. Physical development. What's the first thing you have to know when someone hands you a new baby? What?
Weak neck.
A weak neck, so you have to hold their head. And you can tell from the pictures there, can't you? Look how much bigger the head is. If your head was proportionally as big as that baby's head, think about how big our heads would be if we're walking around. Whoa! But it doesn't keep growing. It's just that you start out with a pretty good sized head, and the rest of your body, if the head grew as much as the rest of the body did, can you see what we would look like? You could probably draw a picture of that. And then motor development simply has to do with you developing your motor skills. What are your motor skills? What do little babies do? The three pictures on the left on page 375 looks like they're not doing much of anything, just some of that grasping stuff. Well, the bottom picture, that little child is starting to do what? Start crawling. That's a motor skill. They start crawling. Before they crawl, does anyone know what little babies do before they crawl? Have any of you ever taken care of a little baby and you laid them on a table and you took your hand off their tummy because you were getting ready to change their diaper, and you turned over to get a diaper, and when you turned back, where was the little baby? They rolled over. That's a motor skill. I mean, they're looking to get around, and they found out they can roll over, and they'll do it. When you reach to get the diaper to change them, keep your hand on the baby so you can feel them rolling around. You say, they're not going anywhere. If you have them on a changing table, where could they go? Down on the floor, people. what is wrong with mothers and caregivers? Are they not thinking about what this little child can do? That's one of the reasons to take classes like this in human growth and development. And if you don't take the class, at least read a book about it. Even though I studied all this stuff, when my wife got pregnant, I went to the library and started checking out books on how to take care of a baby. Because I'm thinking, now that we have one coming to our house, I better do some more reading in this area. And I was surprised when I told some of my friends I was reading all these books on how to raise a baby. And he goes, why would you do that? I'm going, why would I do that? Because we're going to bring this little baby home from the hospital and there's not going to be anybody else there to take care of it. Well, and here's what a friend of mine said to me, a Christian friend of mine. Well, raising children just comes natural. Okay, now, raising little chickens is natural for a mother hen. And raising little calves is natural for a mother cow. Is raising children a natural kind of thing for people? Or do people have to learn how to properly take care of and nourish and raise children? You say, I think probably it'll just come naturally. Then how come, in fact, when I was in one of my psychology classes at the university, and we were talking about children who have all kinds of problems in school, and the professor was talking about the way some of these parents treat their children, how they fail to raise them. And I was shocked. And the instructor looked at me, and I was taking these classes after I was taking these particular classes on children with learning disabilities after I already had my PhD. And so the instructor said, well, look at Dr. Bonine back there. He's a little shocked by all this. And because she thought it was interesting that a guy with a PhD was taking her class on learning disabilities. But I wanted to learn more about how to help kids that had those kind of difficulties. And she said a lot of these are the result of just poor parenting. Parents aren't doing what they ought to be doing. And she said, what do you think, Dr. Bonine? And I said, well, the first thought that comes to my mind is the livestock on our farm took better care of their young than some of these people you're describing to me. You know what I'm talking about? Are you aware of any of the way some parents bring children into the world and don't take care of them? It's sad. It's just a sad picture of what can happen. And I thought at one time, I actually entertained this thought. I said, it might be a kind, God might be doing the world a favor if he kept irresponsible people from being able to get pregnant. Only let the responsible people have babies, but he didn't do it that way. He simply created us with the capacity to have children, to create children, and we can mess things up. And once you realize that, you think, we better be doing our homework from before day one. I mean, I still remember before our first daughter was born, the doctor said, we went to the doctor for a checkup, and the doctor said, well, she's doing okay, but she's feeding a little child. She has to consume enough nutrients to take care of herself and the little child that's growing in her, and I don't think she's getting enough protein. Protein would be meat, right? Because it costs more to store to buy meat than it does to buy oatmeal and potatoes and stuff like that. And I felt so bad. I thought, oh man, what am I thinking? I wasn't being a responsible provider. So I went out and bought me a freezer so I could buy some meat when it was on sale and put it in the freezer. And I said, Nina, I'm going to put stuff in there when I find it on sale, and you pull it out and cook it, and every day cook some meat and eat it. We're going to make this work. Because I was a Christian school teacher, and we didn't have a lot of money, and I thought, hey, I'm going to figure out a way to make this thing work. So just be responsible when it comes to your child's development. And motor development, okay, here's some little kid. Okay, here's two little babies, two little infants the same age, and one of them's crawling and the other one's just rolling around. And so what happens? The parent of the one who crawls, have you ever seen this happen? Oh, your baby's not crawling yet? Well, mine's been crawling for 2 weeks. Is that sad? Why are we doing this to these poor little children? So the parent of the one who isn't crawling yet says, come on, little Johnny, crawl a little bit. Or maybe it's Susie and the other guy has a little Johnny. Come on, Susie, crawl a little bit. And have you ever seen a parent do that? They pick the child up, trying to make the child crawl. They turn them loose and they fall flat on their face and smack their face on the floor. Okay, this is where you speak up, Cassie. When you see that happen, you said, I took a class in psychology at Calvary University, and I'm here to tell you that you're messing up big time. You need to read a book on how to be a parent. And that is not the way to be a parent, is to mistreat a child. Doesn't the same thing happen when they start walking? So, your child's walking, my child's the same age, I want them to walk. You stand them up. They're not ready to walk. So you stand them up, let go of them, and what happens? Now they fall from way up here rather than just down on all fours. What you need to realize, and the Human Growth and Development class talks about this more in detail, is that every kid doesn't learn to walk or crawl or do a lot of those things at the same time. And it's no big deal. Just be patient. Don't damage your child trying to push them ahead to learn to do something that they're not ready for. And in fact, it talks about these stages on page 376. This sensory motor stage is 0 to 2 years old. Some kids will be doing some things at 6 months that others won't be doing until they're a year old. Relax. And then when it comes to this cognitive development, some little kids are saying words, doing things, and playing games that others are just sitting there watching them. And then somebody says, what's wrong with my child? There's nothing wrong with your child. Now, if you think there is, go get them tested. But some children develop more slowly than others. Others develop early and some develop late. In my case, I was such a early, difficult child that my mother, I was born in December, so technically I wasn't supposed to go to school when I did. I was supposed to wait till the next year. But my mother sent me to live with my grandparents because my grandfather was on the school board in his little town, and he could pull some strings and get them to put me in school where the little school where my mom lived wouldn't let me come to school yet. So I started the school. What, you start school when you're 6? Preschool when you're 5, but you actually start first grade when you're 6 years old? Is that right? I started when I was 5 because my mother wanted to get, this is my story, she wanted to get rid of the difficult child and put him in school. And no, she said, he's ready to go to school, so let's put him there. And guess what happened? So as I got older, all of my classmates are driving cars and I'm a year behind them. And then my daughter came along and had a little boy born 5 days apart from his little cousin. And his little cousin went to school when he was right after preschool. But my daughter thought, I need to keep him in preschool another year. He, for some reason, just isn't tuned into this school thing. So by keeping him in preschool another year, that put him a year behind his cousin, who was 5 days, I think either 5 days younger or 5 days older than he was. It wasn't enough difference. But now that they're grown, it doesn't matter at all. But again, during school, just be aware that there are differences going on in children's lives, and parents need to do their homework and make good decisions. On page 377 is a picture of a little girl looking at 2 beakers of orange fluid. Do you see that there? Okay, do you want to tell me what it looks like she's thinking? Guess what? Somebody asked her, which one has more orange fluid in it? Which one has more orange pop? Now, which one looks like it has more to you? The tall one? I mean, on page 377, doesn't the tall one look like it has more? But if we emptied the short one and poured the tall one into the short one, and it just filled the short one up, you'd say, oh, they had the same amount. You follow me? I know that you're cognitively at the place where you could see that. Are you ready for this? With some little kids, you can pour the stuff from the little one into the tall one, and then ask them, and then fill the little one up again and say which one has more in it, and they won't remember that you just poured it. They won't make that connection. They'll just say the tall one has more in it. And no matter how hard you try to teach little kids some things, if they're not developmentally ready for it, they're not going to remember it. Now, since I'm a teacher, and I had my firstborn daughter was very much into books and studying and things and curious about things, I bought all these little workbooks for science to teach them all this stuff about the world that God had made. And I taught her all this stuff about seasons and about the earth's rotation and why the sun comes up. It was amazing, all the science stuff that I was teaching my daughter before she went to school. Then she gets to school and she comes home and says, Dad, you know what we learned at school? And she's talking about the earth's rotation and how that's why it looks like the sun's coming up, because it's really the sun's there and we're just rotating around. And I looked at her and I said, you knew that already? And she said, no, I didn't. I said, yeah. I said, you've got a little book in your room where you worked through that, and you did a workbook on that. I taught you that before you went to school. And she goes, no, you didn't, Dad. And then it goes, ding, the light comes on. What I was doing was teaching her stuff before she was developmentally ready to understand it and absorb it. So when she got to school, she thought she was learning all this stuff for the first time. Now, it could be that what I did made it easier for her to learn it. You know, I might have planted a seed, so to speak, in her thoughts, or I might have put a little track in there or something that gave her some kind of reference point. But just understand that don't push so hard to try to help people learn things that they're not developmentally ready for yet. Page 378 talks about moral development. And I have a handout for you on that. So, do any of you remember any of your earliest moral development experiences? You don't remember any? You do remember some? Anyone remember any moral development experiences? I'm in a grocery store. My mom's shopping. I see a little kid pick up some bubble gum and put it in his mouth. I pick it up, put some in my mouth. We get in the car. My little brother says, Tommy, where did you get the bubble gum? And I go, in the store. And I no more got the words out of my mouth. And my mother had me by the shirt, pulled me over the car seat. I was in the back seat. Did you steal that gum? I'm going, no, I just took it. I saw somebody else take some and I just thought it was okay to eat a piece. Well, you were wrong. And she pulls me out of the car and drags me in the store and makes me go to the store manager, gives me some money to pay for the gum I stole. I remember that. And when I became a teenager, and my teenage friends didn't want to go get a job and earn money to buy gas for their car, so they would go out in the country with a little hose and a can and pump gas out of farm equipment to put in their car. When they would go out and steal gas, I would say, sorry, if I don't have money to buy gas, I'm going home. And they would go, pluck, 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 pluck. Anybody know, what did that mean? Chicken. They go, no, I'm not chicken. I just don't want to die. And they go, what do you mean? I said, I almost died taking a stick of gum when I was a little kid from the grocery store. Who knows what my parents would do to me if I got caught stealing gasoline from another farmer. In fact, one day, my father said to me, son, you're running around with some pretty seedy friends, and you just need to know something. So I'm only going to tell you this once. Did any of you have a father who had a certain phrase when he said, I'm only going to tell you this once? He was giving you life and death information. And here's what he said. If you hang out with those seedy friends and they get arrested because they're doing something illegal, when they go to jail, their parents will probably bail them out. When you get there, don't you dare tell them your last name is Bonine. Just sit there and rot. My dad, he wasn't a Christian, but he was proud of his last name, and he didn't want some knucklehead son of his giving his last name a bad reputation. So if you do something stupid, something criminal, don't tell them who you are, just do the time, and then when you get out, go live someplace else if you're not going to live up to the Bonine name. Say, was that a pretty drastic moral lesson? Yes, it was. And by the way, after I got saved at 18 and had been in Bible college for a while, one summer when I was home, I said, Dad, I want to thank you for something when I was younger. And what do you think I thanked him for? For scaring me to death about stealing stuff? Because when I read the 10 commandments that God had given to the nation of Israel, what was one of those commandments? Thou shalt not steal. My dad was encouraging me isn't that a nice word? Encouraging me to embrace God's standards of morality. And I said, I want to thank you for that, Dad. And he said, well, he said, you've turned out to be a pretty good kid. He said, I probably wouldn't have left you in jail to rot. Okay, now, he said that when I was a grown young man who had his act together. When I was younger and I didn't have my act together, he said it and he meant it, people. I'm telling you, that was my dad. He was proud of his last name. And he did not want his boys embarrassing his last name in the community. You say, well, didn't that traumatize you for the rest of your life? I suppose you could call it trauma. All I know is it kept me from stealing. And I say, thank you, Lord, for that. You understand? Now, do some of you remember some moral experiences? Did anyone ever pick up a bad word that you heard some friends say? You came home and said that word just for fun to see what kind of reaction you'd get from your parents? And what happened? Did they wash your mouth out with soap? Yeah, it's like, I've heard about that. And when I heard that happen to somebody, I thought, You don't go home using words that you don't know what they mean. And in fact, one time I said to one of my daughters when they were little, I said, girls, when you hear kids on the playground using words and it sounds like they're being ugly when they say them, they're mad about something, they're probably not good words to learn. So try to stay away from those words. But if you got your mouth washed out with some soap, you probably were a little more careful after that about the words you would use. Anybody else have some moral training in the world you grew up in? Can you think of anything?
Like, anytime we would get in a fight with one of our siblings, we would always have to get spanked with the rod of correction.
Whenever you got in a fight with one of your siblings. Because fighting with siblings is just wrong. That's foolishness. And the Bible says a rod of correction drives foolishness from the heart of a child. Have you heard that? I mean, it's just there. Oh. And since we're in psychology class talking about this, I was reading a psychology book one time, and it had a thing in it, a little paragraph in it, kind of like these things about life in it, where here's what this guy said. He went over to Leavenworth, to the prison, and interviewed people, and he asked them, how many of you were spanked when you were children? And they all raised their hands. So guess what he concluded? If you spank your children, they will end up in prison at Leavenworth. So ever since I heard that, I do a survey. I do my own little research right here in class, okay? How many of you were spanked as a child? Every hand went up for those online. So guess what I say? Well, guess what? It looks like if you want your kids to go to college, you understand how that's the same thing he was doing. He just wanted to give it a bad twist. And I look at all of you who were spanked for whatever reason in whatever way. I don't need to know the details, but it doesn't look like any of you have been seriously damaged by it. And I have an idea. If there was some benefit gained in your own personal life when that happened to you, no matter what our society says, you will probably, maybe not very often, but it might not have happened very often to you, but you will probably someday say, there will be an occasion when I will use a rod of correction to drive foolishness from the heart of a child. I think the reason I gave this handout on moral development is this moral development section talks about Kohlberg and his theories of moral development. Do I have that in here? No, I guess I don't. And probably the same criticism, it talks about these stages of moral reasoning. And of course, the lowest stage is you do what's right, you don't do what's wrong, because if you do what's right, you'll be rewarded. If you do what's wrong, you'll be punished. And then here at the highest level on page 379, you do what's right because this is just the right thing to do. You embrace these universal principles. Okay, now it's pretty obvious that I've lived long enough to embrace some universal principles about what's right and wrong, which would be up here at this post-conventional level. But when I leave here today and get in my car to go home, and I've got something that I need to do at home, and I'm in a hurry to get there, and I'm driving through the country down County Line Road, so there aren't many houses there, and the sign says 35. What does that sign mean? That's the speed limit. So I embrace these higher principles. One of my principles I embrace is in the book of Romans, submit to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. You go, that's right, Tom. Drive 35. It's like, well, I'm really in a hurry. I've got some important things I need to do. I need to get some stuff done and go pick up my grandson from school. Maybe this time it would be okay if I suspended the higher principle and drove 45 to get home a little sooner. Now, what starts to make me feel nervous about driving 10 miles over the speed limit? You've never been tempted to drive 10 miles over the speed limit? What makes you hesitate about doing that? What?
Get pulled over.
I don't want to get pulled over and be given a ticket and have to pay a $100 fine. I work too hard for my money to give it to them just for speeding. Now, what just kicked in? You see, all of a sudden, I'm embracing these higher levels of morality, and I just reverted back to this basic principle that says there's rewards and punishment in life. And I love it that the Old Testament says, God says, I set before you a blessing and a curse. A blessing if you do what? Obey, and a curse if you disobey. So I'm thinking that this isn't like something that you just work through these levels. You get to the highest level and that's where you live. It's like we're always jumping around. It's like we're moving back and forth for all of our lives on these various areas of moral reasoning. The one thing I really like about this handout is it talks about the socializing mechanism transmitted in religion. So many people today are so critical of religious groups and religious people, but can you think of any moral instruction or any morality that you've gained because of your religious upbringing? You say, well, I didn't go to church when I was little. No, but you went to your grandmother's house, and what did she have on the wall? The 10 Commandments around a mirror. And the one about stealing that my mom nailed me with for stealing gum was a little guy climbing over a fence stealing an apple. And it says, and God said, thou shalt not steal. Because if you're driving down the road and you see an orchard, I mean, don't you think, I bet those peaches would taste good. I bet those apples would taste good. It's like, don't go there because that's the picture on that chart. So even going to see my grandparents, who were very religious, was a moral experience. They brought church into their house. That's another thing. When we would go up there and stay with them, we'd get up in the morning to go eat breakfast. My grandmother would cook all the food for breakfast and put it on the table. Then we would all sit around the table and read from the Bible and spend some time in prayer while the food's getting cold. Then we would eat cold breakfast. I'm talking about eggs and bacon and hash browns. It's like, what's going on here? And my grandfather said one time, feeding the soul is more important than feeding the body. So you understand, without even going to church, I got some religious moral instruction from church. In fact, we had a neighbor when my wife was a teacher when we got married, or actually she became a teacher after we got married, because we got married while we were still in school, but I knew she was going to be a teacher. And then when she had children, she quit teaching to be a stay-at-home mom. But money was kind of tight, so she said, maybe I ought to do something to earn some money. So she said, I know what I could do. I could offer to babysit the neighbor's children so they don't have to put them in child care. Then I'll keep them at my house while they're at work, and then they can pay me for just watching their children. And their children will live with us during the day, and that way I'll have some influence over our children's playmates. Guess what happened? this one couple that became good friends of ours because my wife was babysitting their 2 children. They moved to Tulsa, and their daughter was always wanting to go to church. And one of her friends said, "Why is your daughter so interested in church?" She said, "Oh, her babysitter in Kansas City, when we lived there, she was the neatest lady, but she was very religious. She would have them read the Bible together. She would have them pray before they ate their lunch at her house. And she even took them to church sometime." And our youngest daughter just kind of took to that and liked it. Now, isn't that cool that that happened? That my wife was doing it to have an influence on the neighborhood children, to learn more about them for the sake of our children's playmates, but also to earn some money. And the neighbors even thought of it. And this is interesting too. And by the way, those same neighbors, when she found out she had terminal cancer, and her husband said, "I'll take you any place in the world. Where do you want to go?" And she said, "I want to go to Kansas City and see Nina." And she came up here, and Nina led her to Christ because she was at a crucial place in her life. It was just a beautiful thing to see what could happen. So don't ever apologize for religious instruction. I mean, you'll encounter people as you go on with your education, especially if you go to a state university, you'll encounter people who will make fun of your religious upbringing. And here's what I've concluded. It's like they don't get mad. Okay, they actually get mad at us for having a moral standard in life and for having a good moral upbringing. And I've concluded, I think part of why they get mad is they're a little jealous that they didn't have that kind of stability in life, and it bothers them. They just don't realize what's going on. And of course, even when it says here on this handout I gave you, and this is only page 6 of 13 pages, so you can go look it up on the internet, but it talks about that how religious instruction even increases a person's pro-social behavior. You know what pro-social behavior is? That's that stuff that your parents said you fight with a sibling. Pro-social behavior just means that you're concerned about others, you care about others, you do things for others. Isn't that what church teaches us? Isn't that what our Christianity teaches us? That we care more about others than we do about our own personal interests, and that we look out for the welfare of other people. Okay, that's enough on that one. Let's turn over here to language development. On page 381, shows a picture of a father and a child having a conversation. And may I suggest that when you're around little children, just learn to talk to them about stuff. And when they start making noises that you don't understand, just smile and encourage them and say, "Really? How cool is that? Tell me more." And just spend some time engaging these little children in this thing called language. By age 2, most children will know about 300 words. They go from knowing nothing through all of these stages. It starts out on page 380 with babbling, and then putting words together, starting to make noises that make some sense, and then coming up with phrases. At first, they probably use crying to communicate, don't they? They cry when they're hungry. They cry when they're tired. They cry when they want their diaper changed. They cry when they want some attention. You say, well, if they're crying for all 4 things, how do you know the difference? Have any of you taken care of a little baby? Can you tell a difference between a baby's attention cry and change my diaper cry, and I'm hungry cry, and I want to play cry, and I'm tired cry? Can you tell the difference between those cries? I'll tell you who can. It's a mother who pays attention to being a mother, and it's a father who pays attention to being a father. Okay, by the age 2, kids know about 300 words. How many words do you think they know by the time they're 6 years old? They go from 300 at age 2 to, would you like to pick a number? To about 3,000. They go from 300 at age 2 to about 3,000 at age 6, Guess how many by the time they're age 12? About 15,000. Now, the information I have says they go from age 6 from 2,500 to 5,000, and age 12, 12,000 to 20,000. So I just picked some number in between. They go from 300 4 years later to about 3,000, and 6 years later to about 15,000. Is that amazing? The capacity that God has given us to acquire language. And you know what I say? Okay, have you ever carried on a conversation with a little child? Is it fun to talk to little children? If you haven't tried it, spend some time talking to them. Engage them in a conversation, on their level, of course. Social development. How were you socialized? You were socialized by saying, don't fight with your siblings. How were the rest of you socialized? Do any of you remember going to see your grandparents and your mother telling you, go give your grandma a big hug? Give your grandpa a big hug. Oh, I will, but he kisses you on the cheek and it's just yucky. That's just the way your grandpa is. Give him a big hug anyway. Okay. Ugh. Slobbered on the side of my face. Well, you know what? What was I being taught socially? That when your parents tell you to do something, what? Do it. Did someone teach you if your parents tell you to do something, ask them why, and if they can't give you a good reason, tell them to go jump in the lake? No, hopefully not. Ephesians 6:1-2, children, obey your parents. Honor your father and mother. So I was being socialized by learning to obey my parents, did something I didn't care for. I was being socialized to show social affinity, affection to my grandparents. And this is strange too, because my mom and dad never gave us hugs. They just told us to go give our grandparents hugs. Did anyone ever hear this phrase? Don't talk mean to your brother or sister. That's socialization. Now that you know how to use words, were any of you taught not to call people names? What happened if you did call them a name? Ah! Were any of you ever sent to your room for bad social behavior? Okay. Did you enjoy being sent to your room to sit by yourself and be away from everybody? No? Well, guess what? If you learn that lesson early in life, then when you grow up, you'll know how to conform to society, and the people who don't get sent to their room. It's called a cell in jail, where they're locked up because they don't know how to behave socially, how to relate socially to other people. They're a social misfit, we call them. Dobson says in his, Dr. Dobson, James Dobson has written some books on rearing children. And here's what he says. If the parents don't do the job of helping their children learn to be good social citizens, good citizens in society when they're living in your house, then the larger society, i.e. the police force, will help your children learn to be civilized by making the consequences for uncivilized behavior so drastic that they'll decide it's time to grow up and be a responsible member of society. So always be thinking about what you're going to teach these children. Have you figured out on page 384 what they mean by imprinting? It's simply what you see going on around you, and you mimic that. You follow that pattern. Attachment. How attached are you to somebody? Sometimes when we had a poor crop in the wintertime, we wouldn't have enough money to last us all winter. So my dad would take on a job in the winter, and because he was a farmer and drove a truck, he would sign on to drive a big truck down to the Gulf Coast and pick up a bunch of citrus fruit and haul it back to, we lived in Oklahoma, in Enid, Oklahoma, and he'd haul it back to Wichita, Kansas, and deliver it to a big distribution center for a bunch of grocery stores. And whenever he would come back from down in Texas, the Gulf area where they're raising all this citrus, he would come by the house and he'd say, anybody want to ride with me up to Wichita to take this fruit on up to the distribution center? And I was always saying, I'll go with you, Dad. And I would get in the truck, and he would roll the windows down in the dead of winter because he wanted to stay awake, and I would freeze to death. I still remember it. My teeth would be chattering, and I'm thinking I should have brought a heavy coat. We'd get up there and stand around the fire while they were unloading the truck. Then we'd get in the truck and head back home, and he would roll the windows down again when he got sleepy. And I'd say, I should have brought a coat. Now, when I got home, what do you think? I said, I'm not doing that again. Next time he came through, he said, anybody want to go to Wichita with me? What did I do? Because I was attached to my dad and enjoyed hanging out with him and doing stuff with him. And I'm glad he let me tag along. But he also wanted me to learn to be autonomous. He would give us chores to do, responsibilities, and he would, at night, he would always wait till it was after dark, and he'd say, let's see, who was supposed to lock up the chicken house tonight? It was your turn, Tommy. Did you do that? Oh, man. Well, get out there and lock it up so the coyotes don't get in there and kill all of our chickens. And he would give us responsibilities. So have all of you had occasion to, so to speak, attach yourself to your parents and to develop a sense of autonomy? You know what I think is interesting? This thing about parenting. Doesn't every parent want their children to eventually grow up and be an autonomous person? So when do you start asserting your autonomy? When you're a teenager? Remember we talked about these developmental stages during your teenage years? One time I still remember having this discussion with my daughters. I said, girls, your mom and I want you to grow up and be autonomous, responsible adults. And they go, yeah, that's what we're trying to do, Dad. So why don't you give us more freedom? And I say, well, here's the problem. The things that you want to do to be autonomous are making me nervous. And the things that I want you to do to be a responsible adult bother you. How about we make an agreement here? You make a list of 6 things that you want to do. I'll make a list of 6 things that I want you to do. I'll give you 3 things on your list if you'll take 3 things off of my list, and that will be your little autonomy exercise for the next 3 or 4 months. Then we'll have this discussion again. Do you understand that on page 385, when it talks about parent-child relationships, that it's a difficult area? And does this make sense to you? If you had good parents who did a good job of raising you, you probably will practice a lot of the same kind of things that they did. But my parents, I grew up in a home with 3 boys, and then the 2 girls came along later. So I grew up in a home with brothers, and then in our home we only had girls. So I had to do an adjustment in my thinking. It took a little bit of time, even when they were teenagers. When they started driving, I said, okay, girls, I think it's time for you to learn how to change oil in the car. Where did that come from? Well, that's what my dad taught me to do when I started driving. Yeah, but you're a guy, and guys will do stuff like that. But wouldn't it have been smarter if I would have said to my girls, here's some money, here's where you go to get the oil changed, here's how you keep track of it to know when you need to get the oil changed in your car. Rather than give them a wrench and a pan and say, get under the car and take that bolt out and drain all the oil in the pan. That would be so cool to learn to do that. My daughters didn't think so, and my wife didn't think so either. She said, Tom, I don't even know how to do that. So I said, oh, okay, I'll make some adjustments. So even if your parents did a good job of raising you, it could be you need to make some adjustments in what you do with your own children. And in fact, because we had to get up early in the morning and do chores on our farm, we had to go to bed real early at night. And our girls said, Dad, why do we have to go to bed so early at night? I said, because when I was your age, that's when I had to go to bed. They go, yeah, but you were on a farm where you had to do chores in the morning. We don't have to do all those chores. We just get up and have devotions and go to school. I said, oh, well, maybe we need to make some adjustments. So you see, even if you've had parents who gave you a good upbringing, it could be that you need to make some adjustments. Now think of the other scenario. What about children who were raised in homes where they didn't have good parenting? Are you ready for this? Guess what they're inclined to do with their own children? The same bad things that their parents did with them, not even knowing that that was the wrong way to raise children. Is that sad? So do your homework. But if you have an occasion to help somebody, don't be afraid to step up and help somebody learn how to be a good parent. My mother grew up in a Christian home, and she had good parents. But when she went off to college, she read a book on baby and child care. And here's what the book said. The book basically said this: children, if you were raised in a religious home with a lot of do's and don'ts, then that was just stifling, and that is not healthy. Children are like little flowers. Just water them and feed them and let them grow. A very permissive, indulgent, that's what it would be on the bottom of page 385, a very permissive, indulgent kind of upbringing. Well, she swallowed that line from a book she read in college and started raising her 3 boys that way. Well, if you just water 3 depraved boys and nurture them and let them grow, do they grow up to be beautiful flowers or ugly weeds? Anybody want to guess? We were such ugly weeds, her sister, she couldn't get anybody to babysit us because we would drive babysitters crazy. And so I say, be careful. When you hear all these ideas out there, look at the scripture and sort things out and say, don't let this stuff that culture throws at you. And by the way, the guy who wrote that book, he later wrote another book and said, people misunderstood what I said. No, they didn't. You just gave bad advice to a whole bunch of parents, and a whole bunch of parents started raising their kids by your criteria and messed them up. And Dr. James Dobson grew up in a society where his parents, where he saw friends of his being raised like that, and his parents gave him a Christian upbringing. So guess what he does? He writes a book on, listen to the title of the book, Dare to Discipline. Because at the time he wrote that book, the thought of disciplining children was just anathema in a lot of people's minds. And he said, I dare you, embrace the Bible and be a disciplinarian with your children. Teach your children how to have good relationships with other children, with siblings, with cousins, with neighbors, with classmates at school. Learning to be cooperative, learning to play together, learning to share. Page 388 talks about sex role development. So, where did you girls learn to be young ladies? Who taught you how to be a young lady? Your mother? Your sister? Your aunt? A teacher? Your peers? So who taught us how to be young men? Our dads, our brothers, our uncles, our grandparents. You understand? Somebody taught you that. And when it talks about sex role development, so can all of you think about people who contributed to your development as a young woman or as a young man? So what about kids who don't get that kind of help? Say, everybody gets that kind of help. Not necessarily. And in this day and age, some parents have such a perverted look on life that they've decided they're going to mess with their children and make them something else other than what they were born just for the fun of it. Now that's enough to drive you nuts, isn't it? So be careful about that. Oh, and it also mentions something here. Television. Oh, what's the popular theme in television shows now? Any recurring theme in television shows? I'm thinking that if they have a show without a homosexual in it, it doesn't get made anymore. Is that about right? So, watch how that affects children. So, if every show they watch on television has at least 2 or 3 homosexuals in it, then what's the conclusion? That probably half the people in the world are homosexual. Does anyone know what percent of the population in the United States actually embraces that LGBT, and they're adding some more letters now? Does anyone know what percent of our population embraces that lifestyle and doesn't embrace the traditional male and female roles? Anybody want to guess? Based on your exposure to television and the culture you live in? Does anybody know the statistics? You can Google it and find out. Would you believe it's less than 10%? And the best estimates are about 5%. So here's what I say. If that's the case, if television wanted to accurately represent that population, they would only represent 5 out of every 100 people on the show. That doesn't happen, does it? So, is the culture you're living in, does it have an agenda? By the way, see, I was born before television came along. Television came along, and the Mickey Mouse Club and American Bandstand became my 2 favorite shows as a child. And though I had never seen anybody dance, I concluded that that's what people in the world did. If you want to have a good time, you go dancing. And if you really want to belong, you get a hat with big ears on it and join the Mickey Mouse Club. How dorky. But I'm just saying, we were influenced by television. Then soap operas came along. And all of a sudden, the world is full of immorality, infidelity, adultery, all kinds of stuff going on. And can you see, all of a sudden, that's just the way people live. And when I used to hear students say that years ago, high school students, I'd say, no, that's the way people in Hollywood live because that's the way they portray life in the movies. But that's not the way people live in our society. My girls were watching a show one time on television, and I'm going, whoa, what just happened? They said, what, Dad? I said, that guy just kissed that woman on the mouth. Are they married? And they said, no. And so I said, girls, when we go to church on Sunday, why don't you just pick some woman out? I'll go up and kiss her on the mouth. They go, Dad? I said, what? They go, that would be wrong. I said, well, who should I be kissing on the mouth? They said, Mom. I said, well, how come they don't do that on television? And they started thinking about it. And you know what's really scary to me? A whole bunch of their friends weren't thinking about it. So guess what? Because my daughters were taught to think about it, they embrace very adamantly fidelity in marriage. Whether good, bad, or otherwise. What they say in those vows, for better or worse, rich or poor, sickness and health, till death do we part. They buy into that. And my daughters have a lot of friends who were influenced by the bigger culture out there. So what happens when it gets a little tough? Being a wife. Just quit being one. Being a mother. Just quit being one. Just take off and go do your own thing, because after all, you're entitled to it. And life's going to pass you by if you don't. Yeah, well, the consequences of those choices can be devastating. And I have a couple of good friends I went to Bible college with, who left their wives and married the secretary at work because the secretary understood me when my wife didn't. And I told him at the time, you're making a big mistake. And both of those guys will admit, still to this day, they made the biggest mistake of their life when they left their family. And then listen to what they say next. But there's nothing they can do to fix it, and they'll have to live the rest of their life with all the baggage that comes from making that choice. Now, how come that's not being portrayed on TV? Oh, by the way, someplace that shows people drinking, if you really want to show the real side of drinking alcohol, then what should you show? Alcoholics, liver disease, fights, arguments, and all the stuff that comes with that. Okay, enough of that. Let's turn over here to sexual development on page 392. Little children grow up to be young women and young men, and that transition happens during adolescence. And I think the cutest thing that I see happening during adolescence is usually the little girls are together and the guys are together, and then after a while the girls notice the guys and they want to invite them to a party, and the guys notice the girls and they want them to come and watch them play baseball games. And then after a while they start to develop friendships, and that's just part of them growing sexually in terms of identifying as male and female. And hopefully at the end of those teenage years, when they've gone through all of this getting acquainted stuff, they will decide what criteria they have for a lifetime partner, and probably in their early 20s start dating, and from dating a few men determine which one would make a good husband. And because I had daughters, thinking that way. Or from dating a few women, figure out which one would make a good wife, and then in your mid-20s get married and get on with your life. That isn't the way it's portrayed in the movies, is it? That isn't often the way it plays out in our society, because people just haven't figured it out. They haven't looked at this whole big picture and thought it through about what's a good progression. When one of my girls, who's very socially oriented, has a high level of social intelligence, when she was in junior high, she said she had a boyfriend. And I said, what does that mean? She said, it's just he's a friend, but it's a boy instead of all my girlfriends. I said, oh. I said, okay. So then came Christmas time, and she bought all of her girlfriends a present, and they said, can I buy my boyfriend one too? And I said, are you going to buy all the boys in the class a present, or just this one boy? Well, he's my boyfriend. I said, and the rest of them aren't your friends? She goes, well, yeah, but he's a special friend. I said, well, are some of you, are one or two of the girls special friends, but you buy all the girls presents? Because you want to be friends with everybody? Yeah. I said, well then, wouldn't it make sense to buy all the boys presents? She goes, yeah, I guess it would, Dad. She said, but that could be expensive. Okay, guess what? Are you ready for this one? If you want to make the best choices in life, it's going to cost you some money. So I said, don't worry about it. I'll give you the money to buy the presents, and you go buy all the boys a present, buy all the girls a present, make everybody happy, and be a friend with everyone. And what it did is it broadened her horizons to think, oh, yeah, there's lots of people I can be friends with. And then she didn't get married till she was in her mid-20s. Okay, let's see. On page 397, it talks about some problems of adolescence. And did you know that some of the research says adolescence is not, okay, some books say adolescence is a time of turmoil and difficulty. But the research shows that that's not necessarily true for all adolescents. Some adolescents had a very smooth transition. Probably more of the easy children, and the ones who had difficulty were the ones who were difficult children, and they're the ones that we often make a lot of noise about. Have you ever noticed how the difficult people get a lot of attention and the well-behaved people kind of get overlooked? Page 399 talks about adulthood, love, partnership, and parenting. Now, I know you don't have much use for this right now, but file this away or keep it, make a copy of it to give to some of your friends who are parents. Said, hey, I picked this up in psychology class. What can I, and it's off the internet, printed by the government. What can I do to be a good parent for my early adolescent child? Now, what I'd like for you to do is take a minute to look at this and see if you agree with this. I think all of you identified yourselves as adolescents. Would you agree with this list? The government's telling parents, show love. That's the first suggestion. Would you agree? Would all of you agree? A parent who shows love is going to be doing a good thing to their adolescents. Number 2, provide support. Be supportive. When our daughters were adolescents, all of their friends, their parents would take them to the mall and drop them off and give them some money to go to a movie and hang out. And I went to the mall one day and sat there watching all these adolescents hanging out, and it looked to me like it wasn't a healthy environment. You know what I'm talking about? So when my daughters said that's what their friends were doing and they wanted to do the same thing, I said, you know, that's just not a healthy thing to be doing. Well, everybody else does it. I said, well, I think they're doing it just because the parents want to go out on a date or go shopping and they want to just farm the kids out somewhere. But I'm thinking there are better things to do here in Kansas City than go hang out at the mall and go to a movie. And they said, like what? Okay, and I said, like go to Worlds of Fun. Would all of you agree that would be better than going to the mall? Well then, why aren't all these parents taking their kids to Worlds of Fun? Cha-ching, 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 because it costs more money. I'm just telling you that if you do the better thing, you're going to pay a better price. You're going to pay more money for the good things in life, and taking the cheap way out is probably going to bring some regrets. So just be supportive. So we bought season passes to Worlds of Fun, and I told them they could invite their friends, and we went to Worlds of Fun every weekend when their friends were going to the mall watching movies. Set limits? No, you don't go to the mall and watch movies. You go to Worlds of Fun. Ask your friends to go with you. Be a role model. So guess what? I bought a season pass, went to Worlds of Fun with them, and they still talk about all the stuff we did up there. Teaching them responsibility. No, we don't buy food up there. You pack your own lunch. Provide a range of experiences. Just let them do a lot of different kinds of things and encourage them to try things. And number 7, show respect. I don't know which one of our adolescents did it, but one of our daughters, when she was an adolescent, put a sign on her door, private property, no trespassing. What is that all about? This whole house belongs to me. Hey, she was just asserting her independence, and I thought, go ahead and respect it. It's no big deal. Well, looks like I'm running behind, huh? We'll catch up. We'll finish this up and